We are in the season of Lent, and among my personal practices for Lent, I've given up refined sugar, and I feel the need to let you know I am replacing it with sermon puns. So I Googled puns for Lent, and to my surprise, I found some, including this Lenten story. On the first Friday of Lent, a parishioner who had given up meat went to his church's fish fry run by their monastery, and he loved the meal, even filled up on seconds, and then went to the kitchen to speak to the cooks. "Thank you for a wonderful dinner. Those were the best fish and chips I've ever had. Which of you cooked what?" And the head monk replied, "How nice of you to say. I'm Brother Simon the fish fryer, and this is Brother Alvin the chipmunk." And that story may seem like I told it just for that halibut, but I forgot to mention it was a soulful dinner for the parishioner. Bad cups are how I roll. Bad puns. The tie-in, of course, is Lent. And I mentioned in our March newsletter, Lent began last week on Ash Wednesday. And I also pointed out that Lent is the old English word for the season of spring. The word referred to the lengthening of daylight this time of year. And while we now call spring, Lent has remained the English name for the 40 days, not counting Sundays before Easter. And the length of Lent comes from the number of days that Jesus spent in the wilderness after his baptism, preparing for his ministry. Interestingly enough, in a sort of reversal of the after baptism nature of Jesus' 40 days, Lent in the early church centered on 40 days of pre-baptismal practices as candidates fasted and studied in preparation for their Easter day baptism. And the once baptized Lent remained for all Christians a time of fasting and penitence in order to get right and ready for Easter. It served as a sort of spiritual spring cleaning of the soul. And the tradition of fasting and preparation is meant to echo Jesus' fasting and preparation during his 40 days out in the wilderness. And in Protestant mainline churches like ours, Lenten fasting and preparation before Easter tends to still be the spiritual practice for many Christians. Many of us fast by giving up something for Lent. Some of us also study the faith a bit more, and I tend to add a nature-based meditative practice outside in the wilderness. Nowadays, Lenten practices are by choice, but for centuries, the fasting was mandatory and pretty intense. You could only eat at dinner time, and the meal could not include meat, or fish, or eggs, or butter. And Lent, of course, is not just about personal practices and choices. It may not seem like it out there in the secular world, but on the church calendar, Lent is to Easter what Advent is to Christmas. A weeks-long season getting ready for Jesus' arrival. At Christmas, it is the arrival of Jesus experienced in human form, the King to be. At Easter, it is the arrival of Jesus experienced in divine form, Christ the King, now and forever. And in both Advent and Lent, the official color of the season is purple, which in ancient times is the color of royalty. And so the kingly connection is there. But purple is also the color of sorrow and mourning, which connects to the Holy Week, sorrow and loss. And some also claim we use purple in Lent because it's made from red, the color of blood, and blue, the color associated with Jesus' mother, Mary. Symbolism is understood to represent the blood of Jesus and Mary, who modeled for everyone the proper human response to God and to Jesus. And all of this color symbolism is why I have on this stole, and there are purple paraments now in the sanctuary. You see, while Lent does not have the same secular focus of Advent anymore, many churches still focus on it, including ours. And we started Lent off with a very nice Ash Wednesday service. Laura and Krista and the choir were wonderful and sounded great in the chapel. liturgy was moving, and I'm grateful for all the participants who braved the foul weather that night, and for Kathy who prepared the communion elements, and Pastor Merle who co-officiated. Our church's Lenten practices do not end with Ash Wednesday. Each Wednesday until Easter, there's a 7 p.m. Lenten class studying the faith, and there's still time to sign up if you're interested. And then later, in April, as Holy Week unfolds, we will continue our tradition of having a Palm Sunday service, and then later in the week, a Maundy Thursday service. And all of these Lenten traditions we do to facilitate preparation for Easter and education and spirituality as Christians, to participate in the time-honored tradition of what I'm calling this spring cleaning of the soul. If you've not experienced these practices, I invite you to consider them. There's a reason that Christians have done them every Lent. They have a track of helping us focus on God, learn about the faith, to forgive ourselves, to forgive others, and be involved in the community of love we call church. There's one other Lenten practice we often have on the first Sunday of Lent. It's a Lenten reading relating to Jesus' 40 days in the desert. So today we heard Anne read so well the famous selection of the story from the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew, that story unfolds right after Jesus is baptized. In Matthew's baptism story, just as Jesus came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And as soon as those words from heaven were spoken, Matthew tells us Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. The Spirit instantaneously led the beloved Son, with whom God is well pleased, to the wilderness and temptation. And while this may seem odd, if you recall last week, we discussed how Matthew echoed Old Testament stories in his transfiguration narrative. And Matthew is doing that here too. He does it a lot. Jesus is being sent on a fast-track version of the exodus of God's people. So he goes out of a body of water and into the wilderness to endure 3 primary tests endured by Moses and the Hebrews in the wilderness after they go out of a body of water. The Red Sea. And Jesus does it in a symbolic 40 days instead of the Exodus 40 years. And the 3 tests Jesus experienced echo 3 tests during that Exodus. The first test he faced from the devil in the wilderness is one that Moses and the Hebrews faced. It's about focusing only on physical necessities, food. In this case, represented by bread. Jesus is hungry. In the Exodus, the Hebrew people also wanted food, and God tested them with a special bread, manna from heaven. In Deuteronomy 8, the part of which Jesus quotes to the devil sums up the nature of the original Exodus test. Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness in order to humble you, testing you to know what is in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. See, we're not to live for our bodily needs alone. We're not to put to the side or give up on God or God's commandments because of physical needs. Our needs are met by the Word of God, and the Word of God must remain paramount. Starving, Jesus is tempted by the devil to ask God for not just a serving or even one loaf of bread, but for loaves of bread. And Jesus refuses, noting that bread is not the be-all, end-all, rather that the Word of God is. And the second test Jesus faced in the wilderness is also one Moses and the Hebrew faced. It's about challenging God's presence. In Exodus, the Hebrews complain about water, doubting God's presence. And God has Moses go to a rock God's standing in front of and tells Moses this: strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? That's Exodus 17. And in Deuteronomy 6, which Jesus quotes in part to the devil in our story, it sums up the point of this second test. Do not put the Lord your God to test as you tested him at Massah. Jesus is asked to test God's presence by leaping off a high place, and Jesus refuses, saying the first part of the Exodus lesson: do not put the Lord your God to the test. And the third test Jesus faced in the wilderness is also one Moses and the Hebrews faced. It's about idolatry. Exodus 32 starts off with, quote, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, come, make gods for us, who shall go before us, end quote. And they make a golden idol to worship. And Deuteronomy 6 reflects back on this event too. And that verse 6, is the heart of the Shema, which is posted on Jewish household doorposts for 3,000 years. And it reads, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your minds. When the devil asks Jesus out in the wilderness to worship him in exchange for all the power and kingdoms of the world, Jesus summarizes the Shema in response: away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And that response chases the devil away and ends the testing. And in this day and age, we might look at these tests that Moses, the Hebrews, and Jesus faces kind of irrelevant. Most of us don't talk to the devil, worry about bread, or being thrown off of cliffs, or worshiping other gods. But we actually do face the heart of the temptations. We face not trusting God to help us in our trials, letting immediate physical needs rule our thoughts and actions instead of being guided by every word that comes out of our still speaking God. We are also tempted to put the presence of the Lord our God to test. Alone and corporately, we ask for this or that to validate God. Or worse, we act in risky ways thinking God will defy natural law or natural consequences and supernaturally provide a safety net to rescue us. But God's not humankind's magic genie. What we need to do is trust God in the awe, wonder, and love of creation's natural ways. We're not supposed to rely on supernatural magic. There's natural magic enough. Miracles aplenty in creation and in human compassion and love. But we may not think about it in these terms, but we are tempted to idolize many things in this culture. We may not call them gods, but golden idols are given top ranking over God every day in this country. Things like money and power, politics, even other people or things become what humans worship and follow and center on more than God. We forget that the Lord is our God, our Lord alone. We forget that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our might. The lesson today is about how we are tempted in the wildernesses of our lives, just as Moses and the Hebrews and Jesus were tempted. We're tempted to challenge, to dismiss, to put other things above God. But Torah and Jesus tell us the right path to take when tempted like that. The right path is away from Satan and always toward God. If it's a physical thing that we are tempted to give up God for, we need to remember we are to live for more than physical necessities. That the word that comes from our still speaking God is what is most important. If it is God's presence that we are tempted to challenge or doubt, we must not test if it's there, but trust that God is in the awe and the wonder and the love of our existence. If it's some other thing that we are tempted to idolize, to center our life around, we must remember the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. We can even chase the devil away by remembering that, putting it front and center. And those are Jesus' actions. There's actions taken to pass the test when he was tempted in the wilderness. And they are actions we can and should also take in our own wilderness tests. And that's the lesson from our reading today. It's a lesson in Exodus. It's the lesson in Advent, at Christmas, at Easter, and Lent. In whatever wilderness we may find ourselves in, may we trust and center on the Word of God. May we know God is with us and in the